So today we're together with Jennie Germann Molz. First of all, Jennie, it's wonderful to meet you and for you taking the time right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to join you.
Yes, and the world is our classroom. It is both our reality, but it's also a book title. So maybe we should start there. What made you dive into the whole area of world schooling?
Sure. Yeah. The world is our classroom. And the subtitle is Extreme Parenting and the Rise of Worldschooling. I had written a book about the intersection between tourism and technology. And I was really interested in how technology was allowing people to be social, even while they were on the move, and even with social networks that were distant and dispersed. And so I had done some case studies of couch surfers. I don't know if you recall the days of couch surfing before Airbnb. And I had also studied travel bloggers and mobile apps, the apps that were being developed for smartphones for travelers to engage with the places, the destinations where they were, or to sort of stay in touch with other travelers or with their family back home. And while I was doing this research, one of the travel bloggers in my sample was a father of two kids from Washington, D.C., and he and his wife were traveling. This was like 2010, 2011. They had taken their kids out of school and they were traveling around the world with their kids and trying to keep them on the curriculum with their school back home. So a lot of his blog was talking about those kinds of experiences and challenges. And I thought, oh, that's going to be my next project. Who are these families that are taking their kids out of school and educating them while traveling around? A few years later, I had a Fulbright in Finland, in Lapland. Fulbright is like a scholarship grant that allows scholars from the US to go and stay in other countries and then also funds. And I took my husband and my son with me. And so we were living up on the Arctic Circle, and I knew I had a sabbatical coming up. And so I asked my son and my husband, what would y'all think about maybe doing this, like world schooling for a year, and I could do research on world schooling families. And my son was 8 years old at that time. He got down from the table, he went in the other room, and he came back. I was like, oh, he's not into it. But he came back with a piece of paper and a pencil. And he said, okay, let's start writing down all the places we're going to go.
Nice.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, he's up for it. My husband was definitely up for it. We had done a lot of backpacking and traveling in our 20s before we started a family. And so that's what we did. I had the sabbatical a couple of years later. So when my son was 10, we took him out of what would have been the fifth grade for him. And we traveled around the world. I got to meet lots of other families, interviewed them, did a lot of research on their blogs. And this was even before the word world schooling kind of existed. It was just sort of coming into circulation at that time. It comes from Eli Gerzon. He had sort of developed the word world schooling because he was promoting this idea of travel as education. He was also a proponent of unschooling, but he didn't like the word unschooling because it sort of has a negative connotation, right?
Oh,
It's
yes.
unschooling.
Yeah.
We know that problem.
Yeah. And so he came up with the term world schooling. And then I think Lainey Liberty started using it after that.
We have been traveling now for around 7 years full time with 3 kids, 2 dogs, and occasionally our oldest grown-up daughter with her boyfriend comes visiting us. I can still be in doubt how to define world schooling. It's a nice term. It's a term many people uses when they talk about what they're doing. Sometimes it can look like people are just taking a sabbatical 1 or 2 years out and just enjoying life, and then kind of like to have their back free. They call it something with schooling. Some of it has ended up becoming kind of a lifestyle. But you who have dug into it and researched it, how would you define it? Is there some common traits among the families you have studied?
I resist being the one to define it because I think it depends on the family's who use that term, and it depends on how they define it. That's more interesting to me than me giving them a definition. And yes, there are a lot of commonalities among the families who use that terminology. I think generally speaking, what I've found is that when people do use the term world schooling, what they're trying to get at is this idea of expanding learning beyond an institutional setting, right? Trying to have this philosophy that learning is a way of life and that anything around you can be the impetus for kids to explore, become curious, learn something. And so, for the most part, what I find is that when we start to try to pin down definitions like, well, how long do you have to be traveling for it to count as world schooling? Or how many countries do you have to go to? Or, how frequently are you traveling? These definitions don't really fit the empirical reality of what people are doing. And so it becomes much broader. So people are using world schooling to refer to anything from we take trips on the weekends to people like you who have adopted it completely as their lifestyle. But I think what it really comes down to is a mindset or kind of a life philosophy. And so even families who aren't necessarily traveling at the moment might think of themselves as world schoolers because of that philosophy that they have, that schooling is something or learning is something that is just embedded in family life and in everyday life.
I mean, I totally agree. And I will give you a gold star for not defining it. I think that's the right thing to do because it's one of the beauties of the community, really, that anyone can world school in any way they feel world schooling works for them. And no one can really say what exactly is it. And I just wanted to add that in my experience, there are quite a few world schoolers who have some sort of curriculum with them. So even world schooling can even be traveling around the world while studying a curriculum under some sort of online school or umbrella school or something like that.
Or even people put their school into a local school for 3 or 4 months.
So it's not even
exploring.
Just the ones that look like unschoolers in their style. It also can be homeschoolers, and even schoolers can define themselves as world schoolers, and I wouldn't object. No. I mean, I don't own the word either.
Jenny, there's something about the subtitle that intrigues me, and it is that sometimes when I talk with other people, or when Cecilia and I talk about our way of being parents, we sometimes say that we might be a little extreme, or it might be very different from how other people do it. I find us very normal as parents in some way. I don't think it's in the extreme parenting. And also I can be in doubt if we are radical. Sometimes people are like saying, oh, but you're also a little radical. And I feel we are kind of very normal, but I can also see that it might be taking it to the extreme the way we are listening to our children's wishes, having dialogue with them of how our days are going to unfold. And I'm just in doubt maybe what normal looks like nowadays, because maybe it is that what is considered the norm, for me, that looks extreme to fit into that box of life. But maybe that's where a lot of people who step outside the norm and go world schooling, exploring the world as parents, they find a commonality and might be extreme. What are your thoughts on that? I am sorry I'm rambling a little, but I'm trying to figure out what I mean here.
Sure. I can explain a little bit more why I use that terminology and how it fits in with my broader argument in the book. I mean, I agree with you. As a sociologist, normal is just what we agree is normal, right? There is no objective normal or extreme. It's all relative and it's all socially constructed. But the reason I use extreme parenting is because of some media coverage around families who were there was some media coverage around a family who had a toddler on a sailing trip around the world, and the baby became very, very ill, and they had to call in an emergency helicopter to rescue the family. And in the media coverage, there was a lot of critique about the family's choices being too extreme. There was another book that came out around that time chronicling a family that was basically world schooling and took their very young children to Nepal. And again, the father became very, very ill and kind of risked the health and safety of the family. And so some of the coverage of that was, is this too extreme? And so I thought, oh, is there a line? How is society kind of deciding where that line is of what's extreme or what's not extreme? And as I was doing research with families, of course, there's this concept of radical unschooling, which a lot of people might consider an extreme approach. But then there's also helicopter parenting, which others might also consider an extreme approach. And so I began to look at where these examples of parenting get labeled as extreme, what's actually going on that continuum between being extremely, let's say, free range or extremely unschooling, or being extremely involved, like a helicopter parent. When I use the term helicopter parenting, is that something that has reached Denmark or
I've heard the term before, but it doesn't ring
I think we call it curling parents, probably. I mean, we just have different. I understand what you mean.
What do you call it?
We have the term curling parents. You know the sport curling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you run
like
kids paving the way, making everything easy, and making sure they're going in the right direction. And I think that's what you're talking about. You just call it
exactly.
The reason we call it that is that Denmark, for some reason, is very good at this stupid sport, and we had someone winning the world championship, and therefore,
so everyone knows the terminology. But it's the same kind of. Is it a bit like tiger parenting as well? I mean, that has more push, though.
I think these are all kind of related, right?
Like, but it's the same end of the other end of the spectrum relative to radical unschooling, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. We also have the terms like snowplow parenting, right? Like kind of clearing the way for the kids, not like curling. I love that. I haven't heard curling parenting. I like that one. I'm gonna have to
say that. Maybe it's just in Danish we say it.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Well, in any case, what I realized was that all of these forms of parenting could be considered extreme, depending on the perspective you're coming from. But even though they seem like they're on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, the curling parents or the helicopter parents who are so over-involved and so kind of like managing every aspect of their children's lives, and then the free-range parenting. I think I saw you had interviewed Lenore Skenazy on your podcast, right? And her idea of free-range parenting and radical unschooling on the other end. But what I came to understand is that all of these parents are operating with a similar set of anxieties and aspirations about the world their children are growing up in. And that these families understand that the future is very uncertain. The world we live in is very uncertain, politically, environmentally, culturally. I mean, there are just a lot of things that we just don't know. Not that the future has ever been certain, but there was a sense in the 1900s, I think, for a while, of kind of like, if you do this, your life will unfold like this, right? And you could kind of like, if you take these steps, you will have this kind of a life. But that's really not guaranteed in today's society, especially in places like the United States. Maybe in Denmark, there's a stronger sense of security or predictability.
Well, security we have a lot of, but predictability, I think, is the same.
Right. So these parents are raising children for an unpredictable future, for a world that they aren't quite sure what will set their kids up for success in this world. And these parents are just making a different calculus. The curling parents or the helicopter parents are making the calculus that if they keep their kids on a straight and narrow path, if they make sure that they tick all the boxes, do all the extracurricular activities, get into the right college, that will somehow help them keep a foothold in the middle class. And the parents who are choosing world schooling, unschooling, free range parenting are making a different calculus, which is to kind of embrace the uncertainty and to teach their kids skills to live in uncertainty and to kind of leverage uncertainty, to capitalize on it in a way, right? So rather than battening down the hatches and sort of like protecting their kids against uncertainty, they're like teaching them how to surf on the wave of uncertainty.
I can relate. And also, I mean, if I can add to it as just one little sample of this segment, to me as well, it's about not living for the future, not trying to strategize it, to live a life that makes sense here and now. Not that I think it doesn't set us up for a good life tomorrow, but I think a lot of life is spent trying to set us up for success later. And so we're not in the moment. And I'm trying to teach my children and my husband and myself that we're here now. That's what we know. And not to make the most of it, but to make something meaningful out of it and staying present. So it's not about what can I become, but what am I and where am I and who am I with and what are we doing?
What you said, Jenny, made me think of a dialogue I had with my dad. I wanted to make movies when I was young, around 16. High school didn't interest me. College didn't interest me. But my parents asked me to finish it's called high school, college. It's like from 15,
high school.
Yeah, from 15 to 18. They're like, please finish this. Then it would be easier if you go another direction later. And the dialogue I had with my father was basically, he said to me, but Jesper, if I look back at my career, what I'm working with now wasn't invented when I took an education 30 or 40 years earlier. So I don't know what would be the right education for you. If you want to do this, do it, but then do it good. And it's kind of the same I wish for my children, is that I believe they will find a way, but I believe that if they know themselves good and proper, if they know how to learn, know how to obtain knowledge, and that they have this rest in themselves, then life would be easier. Where for me, you can say academic skills is more an add-on. It will come. Those I'm not afraid of, but I can be afraid of them living a life of personal insecurity or not being able to not stand their ground, but not being able to go out and meet the world. I've met many people during my life who, what is against them is not being able to interact properly with people on their workplace or stuff like that, more than the skill set. I mean, skills can be learned.
What you're describing, what you're outlining here is something that I refer to in the book as the emotional curriculum of world schooling. And one of the things I discovered in my research is that a lot of families would go into world schooling with quite a bit of concern about how their children were going to master an academic curriculum, right? How are they going to learn what they needed to learn? For some families, they went into world schooling already understanding what unschooling was and already having that philosophy, but not all of the families. A lot of the families went into it very much with a schooling mindset embedded in them. And they kind of had to unlearn that and realize that unschooling just kind of fits better with traveling. It's just right than having to have all the books and the schedules and the tests and everything. But the other realization that they often came to was that traveling was teaching their kids things that weren't necessarily things you could test in an academic way. It was teaching them how to communicate. Well, a lot of the things you were just describing, Jesper, like teaching them how to communicate with other people, how to be attuned to other people, how to feel a sense of compassion, how to deal with change, how to become self-reliant. So it was a lot of what I call life lessons, sort of learning how to feel about themselves, how to feel about other people, and how to feel about their place in the world. as a result of traveling. And a lot of the parents would sort of make this justification that, okay, well, my kid can't like list all the US presidents in chronological order, but they can play with kids who don't speak the same language as them, or they can, buy ice cream in a different language and get the change in a different currency, or like they're like learning these other kinds of skills. So, of course, that leaves the big question, like, okay, so they are learning all of these life lessons and all of these sort of emotional intelligence, emotional skills, but what is happening to the academic part of it, right? Like there hasn't really been any longitudinal research on where world schooled kids are in terms of some of the academic metrics that their home countries might expect them to have mastered.
As a parent earlier, I was more fear-based. I was not the one thinking that the homeschooling, unschooling was a good idea. That was my wonderful wife and my kids. And it took me some time to open up to it and understand it. But what I see now is that it is kind of a waiting game, because if they are led to their own devices, not technical devices, but their own time in life, I see it comes. And it comes around for the boys. I've seen it in our family, just 14, 15. There comes a loss for the academics. The waiting period until then, oh my God, I have been afraid. I have been fearful. I've been like, will they ever learn stuff? And then looking at my kids sitting, watching psychology, behavioral psychology, and our son, who is now 13, I can see it growing in him. This lust for something, it's kind of like the brain needs to maybe go through puberty and then some centers opens up. I'm not sure about it, but I can just see it's a waiting game. And I think some people don't have the fear is bigger than the trust in this sense. And of course, every family is different. I can be lucky with our kids, but that it has come, I don't know.
But well, if you're a true unschooler, you don't have to have academics come.
No, but it's not important if it's academics or not. It's seeing the development from going from a playing to someone who wants that deeper knowledge, whatever area it is. It doesn't need to be academic. With Sure, for example, some of what I see is the guitar, how he's going deep with that.
We're talking a lot about our own case. I was thinking one problem I have with this, comparing the academic skills of the world school teenager to the academic skills of the school teenager, is the format. So the school teenager has a specific way of displaying, and I think it's worse in the American school system than it is over here, and especially here in the North, where things are softer in a way. But, they have been studying for the test for such a long time. They know exactly how to show that they know, or they at least have memorized. So if you put a world school kid into these tests, they might fail big time, even though they do have deep knowledge of math and of world history, not just locals. For American kids, it would be American history. Over here might be European history or just Danish history. But our kids and the kids in the community, they have very deep knowledge because they've been to the places, they've been puzzled about the things, they've met the people, they've seen the artwork, or a good reason from our life is that we spend a lot of time 2 years ago in Normandy, France. And obviously we learned a lot about D-Day and the end of the Second World War. So it raveled back a lot of the Second World War stuff. And then, hey, what about the first one? What happened there? And so there was a lot of things. And this just happens in an organic way. Conversations, you drive by another museum or another memorial, something, and you talk about it, you see it, you've been there. There's the Bell Church Tower where that guy got stuck with his parachute and what happened to him, and he had to pretend to be dead for 6 hours, all the things. And these stories stick because you were there, and you were actually just out buying bread, but then you learn. And they have very deep knowledge. And now, just 6 months ago, we spent a month in Krakow, Poland, and they went to Auschwitz, and we lived in the Jewish ghetto area where the Jewish ghetto used to happen during the war. So these things are so deep in the cells of the knowledge of our children now. They might not be able to spit out names and dates. They might mega fail a multiple choice test on the Second World War, but I can guarantee you they know a lot about it. You know, they read Primo Levi, they saw the movies, they had all the conversations, they still have them. And this is the kind of knowledge, it might be a little bit fragmented compared to the ambition of a curriculum, but it looks different and it feels different. So I think if we did a long-term study of world school children and how their academics evolved during their teenage years,
how would we
I don't
measure?
think it would be right to measure with the same instrument, because my kids have never had a multiple choice test ever. They've never been to school. They've never written an essay. They don't know how to perform in an exam, but they know a lot of stuff. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I think very often when we try to compare the world-schooled and unschooled children and their level of academic knowledge to the schooled children, we tend to compare it to the ambition of the curriculum, not to the reality of the kids coming out of school. It becomes this, do they know all this stuff that most of the kids who come out of school actually don't know? And that's another I find as a mother, I've been doing this for what now, 12, 15 years, something like that, unschooling my kids, our kids. I feel when I sometimes have to defend our lifestyle, I have to defend it up against the standard very few teenagers of the traditional or normal, whatever, mainstream life actually meet. So why do I have to do that? Because most world school kids, they don't fail in life. Whereas a lot of school kids actually fail the exams. They don't know all the stuff.
I'm curious, when are you kind of asked to defend your lifestyle?
Not very often any longer, no.
No.
But I mean, just recently we were at a wedding. And
But that was curiosity.
There were other people talking. And there was one couple, they were curious and interested, and we talked to them for a long time, and that was fun. But we are the traveling circus sometimes when we arrive in settings with people who live mainstream life. And a wedding is a good example. When we meet people who are not part of the community, of course, we're surrounded very often by other travelers and other home educators, so we don't have to defend our lifestyle. But then again, then maybe the sister of a home educating friend shows up, or a friend of a friend, or a mother-in-law, or sometimes it can even be the bus driver, asking why they're at school.
I think it's a very wonderful question, Jenny. There's a skewed reality that I think we as parents doing something outside the norm are more often asked about the validity of our choices than the people following the norm. I find this is at the same time natural, because when people do something outside the norm, people get curious, and it can also be a mirror that reflects their own choices in a way they maybe don't like. So it would be better for them if our lifestyle was sucked and it wasn't good, in a sense. I see, if I look back at when we started traveling 7 years ago, my life changed from being at work, talking with colleagues who knew we homeschooled, to going traveling. And one of the things I saw was that it changed, where people earlier had been more critical against homeschooling. Then they were like, oh, are you going on a world adventure? I always dreamt about that. So there is this fun difference just based on that now we do it location independent. But I think the overall thing is that maybe we sometimes still feel a need to stand our ground against the norm, and that can end up coming something where we defend ourselves. And then there often also are people asking at weddings, other things. And one of the things or their arguments when we talk with them is, oh, but you can do it. We could never. And I think that makes it easier for people that we do something different if they can define it as luck or a world where it's not possible for them, but we are lucky in some sort.
So it sounds like most of these situations are social, not defending to, I don't know, your local school district or
Oh,
the
no,
state,
no.
the
We have no
government,
problems with authorities. No,
crossing borders.
no, not that.
With-
No,
Never
Denmark
that.
is wonderfully free.
Well, everywhere. We've never had any
No.
problems with taking our kids over borders or with local police or authorities, schools, anything like that. We're lucky enough to live in come from a country. We don't live here any longer. We just happen to be in Denmark right now, where it's a constitutional right to homeschool. So if there was ever anyone to ask us locally somewhere, what are you doing? We can just lean on our constitution and say we have the right to do this in our country. But we have actually never been asked. No, when I actually do feel attacked. I've been thinking about it for the past 10 minutes or whatever of this conversation. I feel sometimes attacked with these questions, what would happen if, and are you sure they're learning that? And how can you, but all of those things, sometimes it feels like an attack and it feels like I have to defend. And that brings me back to extreme parenting. And I'm thinking, the risk taking you talked about, getting sick on a boat or getting sick in Nepal. I mean, in your country, you get sick from having the school lunch. It just takes a longer time. Who's taking the larger risk? The mental health of children these days, it's declining rapidly. Most of them, a lot of them feel really, really poor.
No, it's not Jennie's
I'm
job
not
defend the
attacking
American
your
state.
country and such, but we don't have school lunches, so I can't attack the school lunches here. But I mean, even just feeding your kids things you can buy in the supermarket can get them sick. This lifestyle, the mainstream lifestyle with the school life, it's clear that it's attacking the mental health of the children and the young people. It's clear that there's a great risk of a very, very bad life. There's a risk to their health and to their mental health. And we have to defend taking them to a country that might have some disease that we weren't prepared for, or drinking water that might be poisoned. I mean, the water is pretty often poisoned in Western countries. Just take it out of the tap and it's full of crap these days. So why is the risk that I'm taking so much more irresponsible compared to the risk everyone's taking all the time?
The point you're making is one that a lot of the parents I interviewed also made, that they felt like taking their children to travel and to world school was a much lower risk than having them stay in conventional institutional schooling, especially in the United States, where school shootings are actually quite common, where a lot of schools, well, like you point out, the food, the school lunches, the health of those lunches is questionable, bullying. So families have a lot of like counterpoints, right, of why maybe staying in school is riskier than not staying in school.
Yeah. And sorry if it came out, I'm not attacking you personally.
Oh, no, I know. Yeah.
No, of course not.
No.
I'm just thinking, why is it even, it's just funny how, shit can hit the fan for everyone, really. I mean, that happened to that family on that boat, but it could really happen,
At home as well.
There are probably a lot of people sailing around the world who don't get very sick. And
I think that world schooling and really any kind of alternative lifestyle or countercultural lifestyle, I like to think in terms of how these things reveal anxieties. So for the families that are choosing this lifestyle, they're doing it because they have some anxiety about the status quo, right? There's something about the status quo that just isn't working for them, or they have anxiety about how if their kids don't really toe the line or fit into the school setting, maybe they've been diagnosed with a learning difference or with ADHD, or They're not good at taking standardized tests, like you were pointing out, Cecily, like that your kids have never even taken a multiple choice test. So there's a lot of anxiety that comes from trying to fit into a system that doesn't feel authentic. But there's this other anxiety floating around when we have alternative lifestyles and people who are pursuing these alternative lifestyles. It creates anxiety in the broader society because it's like, oh, wait, things could be different. And right. And so we start to see what some of the deeper held, like the anxious zeitgeist of a society is at the moment. People like yourselves who are kind of like, oh, wait, no, we don't actually have to do that, stirs up that kind of existential anxiety. Like, oh, wait, if we could be doing things differently, why aren't we? And so I think it's interesting to look at it from both of those angles.
And I think that's exactly why I feel I have to sometimes defend my lifestyle. It could look on the surface like a innocent, curious question, but behind that is this inner turmoil. So if what she's doing makes sense, then I could have done the same thing. And maybe I actually felt every time I told my child to go back to school where he's bullied, or I left my very young child in the care of someone else, and it hurt and it felt wrong, but I suppressed it because the nursery teacher told me that this is normal and they will stop crying in 3 minutes. If I have to feel all these things now and I have to realize that I could have done something else, then how do I handle that crisis? Oh, it's better to protect my own emotions and just attack that woman doing her crazy stuff. And I think that's why it becomes this feeling that I have to stand my ground. And I usually try to get out of it if I have that feeling that this is what's going on, or something, there's too much energy loaded in the questions. I usually ask
when it's
for the
curiosity,
salt, or comment on the red wine, or just something.
Jennie,
change the subject.
Emotional skills. That's an emotional skill.
Yes, it is.
Jennie, I am curious about why it is on the rise. We were not the first who did it. To take our own story very briefly, we started homeschooling because one of our children didn't want to go to school. Cecilia has just beat cancer. They had been at home with us, and it felt unnatural for him to go away from mom that had been at the hospital for half a year. And then we started slowly, still finding our grounds after living through this difficult period. And when you start homeschooling, you realize how much of your life is turned up and circled around having a child in a school. For us, it was the house we lived in, the job I had, and all these things were like in a circle around our house, the children's school, and my job. But then when the kids were at home, I was the only one going away. And then in the end, it just felt weird that we had a big house. I was never there because I had to make the money. And then
we were never there because we were always on a day trip.
Always on a day trip. And then the sun just shined a lot more in other countries, and we ended up going. But to take the question again, we started our travels 7 years ago and dipped our toes in it before that, but have been full-time traveling for now 7 years. But you told about this guy who started already in 2010, and it's 15 years since, and you say that it's on the rise. What do you think it is in society that is making this more popular? Do you see some streams of what is happening that might make people say, hey, I want to opt out of this? What are your thoughts on it?
I think there are so many factors that feed into the growth of world schooling and other kinds of mobile and alternative lifestyles. I see a lot of overlap between world schooling and digital nomadism, for example, which is what I'm studying currently. I think, I don't know if I can break it down into points, but I'll just say a few points. I think one is technology, and that there's a lot to that. So technology in the sense that it's made location independent work possible, and in the social media landscape that has made the lifestyle visible and I think in a lot of ways more accessible. A lot of world schooling families, and similar with digital nomads, spend a lot of their online air teaching other people how to do the lifestyle. And so I think that gives it more accessibility. The other factor, I'm not sure exactly how I would pinpoint this, but I believe that there has been just a general decline in trust in government and in government institutions, and a general decline in the sense of schools as a common good. And so I think a lot of families are disillusioned by school as an institution and don't trust it. They themselves may have had bad experiences when they were students, or their children have bad experiences. The kind of neoliberalization of the education market has created this situation where, going back to our earlier conversation, there's a lot of standardized testing, standardized curriculum, and families just aren't finding that is meeting their needs. And so they're more willing, I think, to reject institutional schooling. And then just access to travel. I mean, my book came out in the middle of COVID, and the publisher was like, oh, well, they barely even marketed it because they were like, well, I guess this is over.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, this is just getting started. Because yeah, I mean, there's a little glitch, and a lot of people stopped traveling for a while during COVID. But what COVID showed a lot of families was that they could do schooling online. And so schooling could also be location independent. And so I think coming out of COVID, we saw world schooling and digital nomadism kind of turbo boosted by those.
That's true.
So that's just to name a few.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts about being a nomad, because that's not a new thing, but it feels like the nomadic lifestyle have gotten this revival with the tech and the infrastructure and all these things. Do you think it's something deep inside of people that there is this need? Have you thought about this, studied it? Because for me, it feels supernatural, but also the nomadic part of returning to the different watering holes, you can say. When we travel, we more or less have a route, places we return to, friends we return to, and where we follow the weather. Denmark is wonderful in the summer. Today it's raining. It's raining, but generally Denmark is beautiful and lush in the summer, and Spain is wonderful in the winter. So we follow the sun or the seasons, and eternal spring is quite nice. But what are your thoughts on this? Have you looked into this in any of your other studies also?
So you're right. Nomadism is the human story, right? It's not new, but the kind of digital nomadism that we're looking at now is also not new. David Manners and Sugio Makimoto published a book in 1996 called The Digital Nomad.
Wow.
And in that book, they predicted basically exactly what has happened, right? That as work became more digitized and therefore location independent, and people didn't need to be in offices to do their work, that they would follow what Manners and Makimoto called that kind of human impulse to nomadism. They did say something kind of interesting in that book, though. They said the one group of people who won't be able to be digital nomads is families, because the geographical tie of school is too strong and they won't be able to break it. So that's one prediction they got wrong. So if you ask them, yes, there is this kind of like innate human impulse to travel, to wander. But I think you're also getting at another part of it, Jesper, by talking about returning to the water holes, which is that for nomads, for all of us, place still matters. And having a sense of belonging to place or in place is still incredibly compelling. One of the things I've been tracking in my research is this idea of the digital nomad map, or like geographies of digital nomadism. And you're probably familiar with the hubs, right? You can probably guess exactly what they are, where digital nomads tend to go. Medellin, Colombia, Chiang Mai, Thailand, Bali, right? So places that have the weather, the tourist amenities, fast Wi-Fi, all of that stuff. But what I'm also finding is that families are charting a slightly different map to digital nomads who are traveling without kids. So digital nomad families who are traveling with kids are tending to chart this map where they're more likely to go to smaller towns or maybe rural or remote areas, or like you're doing right now, to live on farms with other families. So it's less an urban map and more of a kind of slightly more rural or small town map. Also, as we talked about earlier, while a lot of these families do unschool their kids, a lot also do want to enroll them in schools, but not in conventional schools. So places that have alternative schooling options, like the Green School in Bali, for example, the Hypeia Learning Hub in Portugal, some of these destinations that have either like a world schooling community hub or that have a school with an alternative curriculum become the destinations on this map. So digital nomad families are kind of creating a new map and circulating among these very familiar destinations.
What changes have you seen since your book came out?
Oh gosh, just the sheer growth in number of families who are undertaking this lifestyle, the visibility in online and social media settings has been astounding to me. I think the kind of the mainstreaming of world schooling, the mainstream media has become really interested in it. It's still really not a topic in academic research. I don't really know that many other researchers who have been looking at it from an academic perspective, but the mainstream media has definitely tuned into it. I've also seen the rise of a whole cottage industry of businesses and products and services catering to the world schooling market as well, and the digital nomad family market, which wasn't really there 10 years ago.
Jennie, where does your curiosity come from? Why are you curious about the digital nomad and the world schooling? What is it that makes you use so many hours writing a book, doing research? It's a kind of a nerdy thing here. So what is it?
Thanks. I'll take that as a compliment.
It is.
That
It
I'm
is
a nerd.
indeed.
It is nerdy. I moved around a lot as a kid. I went to 11 different schools before I graduated from high school. And in my 20s, I traveled all over the world. And I remember being at a hostel in Indonesia back in the 1994, maybe, and seeing this guy with a laptop computer and all these wires trying to get a modem hooked up to a phone cord. I didn't even know what a modem was. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I have to send my newsletter to all my friends, updating them on my trip. I was like, oh my God, my friends have no idea where I am. Like maybe they got a postcard from where I was 5 weeks ago, but like, this is crazy, right? It was just so fascinating to me, this desire to travel the world on the one hand, right? That human impulse to be nomadic on the one hand, paired with this desire to be in touch with everybody back home at the same time. To me, that was such an interesting paradox. And that's kind of what all of my research has explored ever since. How do we move and stay connected? What does that look like? Why do we do it? Why do we want to do it? So maybe that's where my curiosity comes from.
Jennie, it has been a big pleasure. It could be really great if you want to share the title of your book, where they can find it, and where they can read your research if they want to. And also, just how do they dive into the world of the subjects that interest you? Where do they find you and your research?
Where do they find me? Well, I am not very active on social media, but you can Google Jennie Germann Molz, and that will take you to my account at College of the Holy Cross, where I teach sociology. My book is The World is Our Classroom, Extreme Parenting and the Rise of Worldschooling, published by NYU Press, and it's available anywhere you buy books.
So to round up, it has been really interesting, and it has been fun for me to hear an academic view of the lifestyle we have walked down. And I know I will ponder of some of the questions that have arisen here. So thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
It was
Yeah.
fun.